The same day at Mitchell's work, he reads an email from Yomi Entertainment asking about Gia and doesn't quite know what to make of it. He takes a coffee break while reading news about their being stranded. Suddenly, Mitchell is confronted by various women in his office who ask if he knows he's famous. They think it's so cool that Mitchell blocked the sun for his wife. Nervously, he says thank you, but one of the women makes a move and asks if Mitchell would block the sun for her just once. Gia can't believe this is happening to him. Mitchell has a headache just thinking about it. He's not close with the co-worker, yet she had the audacity to say something like that. Gia nervously asks if he actually did it for her, and Mitchell reassures her that he didn't because something felt off. Gia's so relieved to hear this, but her expression changes when he says it wasn't just the one girl. Everyone in the office wanted Mitchell to block the sun for them. Gia thinks for a moment and asks why Mitchell doesn't just go ahead and block the sun for them. Unfortunately, Mitchell falls for the bait and asks if he can, thinking it would make Gia jealous. Gia confidently confirms that she's not that petty, but in reality, she totally is. She lies awake that night, unable to sleep because she's annoyed by the whole situation. Meanwhile, Mitchell sleeps soundly, unaffected. Gia decides he deserves a little punishment and wraps his arm under her head so it will be extra stiff by morning. Suddenly, Gia's attention shifts to Mitchell's ring, and she starts sweating, her thoughts becoming impossible to decipher as she watches him sleep, feeling both frustrated and oddly sentimental. Soon, Gia is fast asleep on Mitchell's chest. He lifts his eye mask and looks at her, blushing. He gently places his hand on Gia's cheek and repositions his eye mask, realizing he won't be able to sleep with her like this. In the morning, Mitchell tries to unstiffen his arm, and Gia smirks at his feeble efforts. She asks him what's wrong with his arm. Mitchell explains that it's strangely stiff, which means her prank worked. Although she feels guilty, Mitchell thinks it's actually because yesterday was arm day. Gia tells him to take off his shirt so she can put a cooling patch on him. Although Mitchell initially declines, he eventually ends up shirtless with the cooling patch on his shoulder. The patch makes his shoulder feel better, and he comments that maybe it's because Gia put it on him. This catches Gia off guard, making her embarrassed. She quickly resorts to violence and complains about Mitchell saying things like that so early in the morning. Later, Mitchell is at work, facing off with the copy machine. He triumphantly copies a paper cutout of his hand and hands them out to his co-workers, explaining that they can use them to block the sun. His co-workers are dumbfounded. Mitchell proudly explains that as a married man he cannot block the sun for just anyone. He then smiles at them, which is simply too much for his co-workers to handle, and they flee the scene. Mitchell is left confused, wondering what just happened. Handling the situation seems hard, and though he thinks Gia would approve of his solution, he's unsure what she'd say about the email he received yesterday since he forgot to tell her about it. The scene shifts to the cafe, where Yandu nonchalantly greets Gia. Gia explains that they aren't open yet and asks him to leave without saying his name. Yandu comments that she couldn't even say his name and wonders what he should order since he's here. Gia tells him again that they're not open. Naturally, Yandu ignores Gia's request and orders a hot-iced Americano. Gia is fuming but holds her composure, asking if this is a trending drink. Yandu explains that it's the cafe's signature drink. Gia somehow manages to remain calm and tells him to wait while she makes the order. As Gia begins preparing the drink, Nari is sweating, concerned about what Gia is actually doing. Gia pours a red liquid into the drink and presents the hot-iced Americano version to Yandu. Yandu is suspicious because the drink doesn't look hot, but Gia urges him to try it before judging. Yandu then makes a motion as if he's smoking, and Nari tells him that smoking isn't allowed in the cafe. He clarifies that he's using an inhaler and asks if the cafe bans medical devices. Nari profusely apologizes, and Gia tells Yandu to stop messing with Nari and just say what he wants from her. Yandu claims he's not here for business and says he's actually here because of the viral video of Gia. Gia comments that he's here for business and demands to know what he wants, but he assures her that he wants nothing and suggests that Gia should claim the benefits of the situation while she can. Jia is confused, so Yandu explains that the interview has gained a lot of traction and surely Jia has made some money from it. Jia admits that she hasn't and regrets doing the interview because it's only made her life more tiring. Yandu quickly calculates how much money Jia could have made and shows her the astronomically large number. Jia is stunned, unable to believe it's real, but Yandu reveals that the information is restricted because the interview is associated with his company. He tells her that if only she were affiliated with his company, she could get a cut of the profits. Jia thinks Yandu is only here to rub the number in her face, but he isn't. He says that Jia is still under his company's management. Jia is confused, and Yandu explains that it's the same contract she signed when she was a writer with his management company. In Article 17, Paragraph 3 states that the contract is automatically renewed every year unless manually terminated. Since Jia never did this and simply disappeared without a trace, their contract is still technically valid. Yandu asks if Jia wants to get involved again, but she's hesitant. The scene shifts to the iced hot Americano lady sitting outside the cafe. She thanks Yandu for his work, and he confirms that his scheme worked. He hands her the iced hot Americano version, and she reveals that they're getting involved with Jia because her going viral is an opportunity to profit massively, which would be foolish to miss out on. She then takes a sip of the drink, immediately starts sweating, and yells at Yandu for ordering something so spicy. The secret ingredient in the iced hot Americano version is extremely spicy. While the lady is screaming at Yandu, he sends an email to ensure that Jia is forced to work with them. It's now night, and Jia arrives home tired, but Mitchell is already home and tells Jia that they need to talk with a concerned expression. Jia and Mitchell are seated across from each other, and Mitchell has a blank expression. Typically, it's hard to tell what he's thinking unless he's exercising, but Jia knows something is different today. Mitchell is pissed off. Jia asks if something is bothering him, and he brings up a clause from their relationship contract which says that communication is a priority. If this is an issue, Mitchell has come up with a solution, a lie detector, which they used once a long time ago. Jia is apprehensive and doubts if this is really necessary. She asks if Mitchell doesn't trust her, but Mitchell explains that he has this because he doesn't trust himself. He says that if Jia doesn't want to, he can be the only one wearing it. Jia doesn't know how to respond, as Mitchell has left her no room to object. Naturally, Jia gets up and asks Mitchell if he thinks she's scared of a lowly lie detector, declaring that the second truth game will begin. Since this was Mitchell's idea, he goes first. Jia's first question is if Mitchell is currently angry. He says he is not, and they sit in silence as nothing happens. Jia can't believe her assumption was wrong because Mitchell's face definitely looked angry, but he starts sweating and yells out because the lie detector hurts so much. Mitchell finally admits that he's angry and warns Jia that the lie detector's strength seems to be amplified for some reason. Jia's nervous but places her finger on the device. Mitchell's question is if there is anything Jia is hiding from him. Her mind immediately goes blank, and she thinks of all the times she snuck spicy stir-fry squid in the middle of the night, lied about exercising, had a junk food feast and ate right after exercising. Just thinking about this makes the device sting. Jia quickly says the device is broken because she never answered the question, but Mitchell still wants an answer. Jia avoids it and demands to know why Mitchell is angry right now. Mitchell asks if there is a connection between Jia and Yomi Entertainment. Jia is shocked. Mitchell knows about them? He explains that he saw the email asking about her, and when Yomi Entertainment sent an email saying a contract with Jia had been established, Mitchell felt left out because the decision also concerns him. Jia is confused because she never received an email from them and assumes this is why Yondu showed up at the cafe. She had a bad feeling about it, but can't figure out why he contacted Mitchell without her knowing. Jia can't figure it out, so she decides to explain everything to Mitchell about her time as a writer. When Jia was in college, she would lie on the bed and read books while Yandu was writing. One day the phone rang, and Yandu assumed it was for her. But it's not for Yandu, it's for Jia. A publishing company is calling, and Jia is surprised they're interested in her and not Yandu. Jia meets with the publisher, who is of course Yandu, and he calls her a writing genius. He refers to her as the fire chicken author because he doesn't know her name yet. Jia insists he call her by her name and says she's not a genius. He's being too nice. Yandu disagrees and says it's the truth. He then explains his honest opinion. The novel is terrible, no grammar rules are followed, and it's something you'd find on an internet forum. Jia is on the verge of tears, but Yandu reassures her that none of that matters because it's fun to read. Furthermore, it's her first novel, and it's somehow managed to win first place in a competition. Jia admits that she was a bit lucky, but Yandu says that luck is a skill in itself. He asks who Jia's favourite author is, and she says she reads whatever. She's not picky. Suddenly, Jia comes up with a genius idea and shows him something on her phone. After reading it, Jia asks if it's not good because this person's writing stands out to her the most. Yandu smiles and says it's pretty good, the writing style is elegant and professional, and he asks Jia to introduce him to whoever wrote it. The scene shifts to Jia returning to Ginger's room with items Yandu bought for her. Yanu asks how the meeting went, and Jia explains how he kept calling her a genius, but most importantly, she showed him Yu's writing, and she's concerned. Yanu asks why, and Jia explains it's because Yu is her favourite author. Yanu, strangely mad, sheepishly asks what the publisher thought of her novel. Jia tells her that he said it was well written, but she doesn't know if she can trust him because he wanted to make a bet with Jia. The bet was that if 1,000,000 or more copies of her novel were sold within 6 months, Jia would have to sign an exclusive contract with his company. Yandu believes Jia's novel is going to be a jackpot, but Jia is still skeptical and thinks he's full of it. However, if Jia wins, she can give him 3 forehead flicks, which she deems a lethal attack. Soon, Jia's first novel is published and she picks up a copy for herself. Jia thought she was just lucky, but she never expected so many people to love her writing. The first edition of the novel sells out, and within a year, 300,000 copies are sold. Just like that, Jia becomes an author. Meanwhile, Yenu is reading Jia's novel with her dogs out and is deep in thought. She recalls how Jia started writing because she was bored, and now she's a published author. Thinking of this makes Yenu laugh. How the idea of Jia being a genius is a joke. This notion is confirmed when she has to fight a dog for the book. After recovering her book, Jia gets on a bus and wonders what the odds are of someone else reading her book. It turns out it's 100% because someone is reading it. Jia celebrates this miracle and heads back home, immediately starting to poke Yenu to get her attention. Yenu is confused about why Jia is so excited, and Jia explains how she saw someone reading her book on the bus, laughing while reading it. This filled her with pride. Jia then asks Yenu what she thinks of her book and if it was any good. Yenu doesn't know what to say, but ultimately decides to lie and says it was really good and interesting. This makes Jia excited and she hugs Yenu. Jia is relieved because she thought her novel was a total mess, but she asks Yenu again if she's just saying that to make her feel good. Yenu knows it's a mess, but she grabs Jia's hair and repeats that her novel is actually really good. After recovering her hair, Jia asks how Yenu's meeting with the publisher went. Yenu's expression implies it didn't go well, but she says he liked her writing and even gave her his business card. Jia is happy for Yenu's success, and it's time to celebrate all night with chicken feet and beer. Soon, Jia passes out on the floor, and Yenu is left to clean up. She decides to raw dog it by crushing garbage with her bare foot. She remembers her interaction with Yendu, who asked her about the difference between good and interesting, implying that her writing isn't good enough. Just thinking of this is enough to make her break the bag in frustration. After this day, Jia's golden age began. She brought Yenu with her on a trip and took a picture next to the Leaning Tower of Pisa. She dropped out of college and had time to do whatever she wanted. She also had more money than she knew what to do with and officially became a god-tier bombshell. If Jia was craving pizza, she'd fly to Italy. If she wanted to see a musical, it was on Broadway. She even sent her parents on a cruise. Eventually, Jia and Yenu meet Yandu again. He asks Jia when her next work is coming out, and Jia explains that she's working on it, but she constantly gets distracted by new ideas. Suddenly, Jia gets a call and excuses herself, leaving Yandu and Yenu alone. Yandu mentions how this whole situation is cruel because the work Yenu poured thousands of hours into is overshadowed by Jia's carefree scribbles. Yenu claims she doesn't know what he's talking about, but her expression says otherwise. Yandu doesn't want to see this anymore and knows that if Yenu stays in the industry long enough, her real talent will eventually come out on top. He tells Yenu not to compare herself to Jia's immediate success. Sometime later, Jia's hard at work on her next project. The words endlessly pour onto the page, to the point where even eating becomes a distraction. Jia would only realize what had happened when she was out of breath, but the bigger issue was that Yenu had stopped writing completely and opted to lay in bed instead. The scene shifts to Jia in a meeting with Yandu, who claims her next book will sell at least 1 million copies. Jia thinks he's just flattering her, but he's being honest. Yandu believes Jia's next book smells like pure profit, and he suggests she turn her novel into a series, one for each season of the year. Jia is confused, but Yandu explains that the company is investing everything into her book and is debating whether to turn it into a movie. Jia can't believe this is happening, but Yandu's expression changes and he asks if she has any concerns because she looks like she has something on her mind. Jia explains the current situation with Yenu not writing anymore and asks Yandu to help her get started again. She reveals that Yenu's biggest wish is to hear that her writing is fun, and Jia believes it is, but Yandu remains unimpressed. He asks Jia if she really thinks Yenu's writing could shine just by making a few minor edits. Jia confirms this and explains that Yenu's writing can be tedious at times, so a little tweaking could fix it. Yenu laughs, saying it's easy for Jia to say because she's a genius. He simply can't see a way to turn Yenu's writing into something engaging, and neither does Jia. If Yandu knew how to do it, he would have done it already. He tells Jia to stop throwing those harsh words around. Mere mortals like them can't just fix everything with a few edits. This is the first time Jia has been scolded as a novelist, but she knows that Yenu is the most talented writer she knows. Whenever Jia gets stuck, she thinks about what Yenu would write, and this process helped her become a successful writer. Jia can't believe Yenu hasn't become a writer yet, and she believes she knows how to fix it because she has a clear perspective. Jia remembers that Yenu's birthday is next month, and she wants her to smile again. So, Jia decides to go all out for Yenu's birthday. When Yenu's birthday arrives, she's enraged because Jia presented her with a slightly refined version of her novel. All Jia did was trim the unnecessary parts, but Yenu is pissed off by Jia's audacity. In a fit of anger, Yenu brutally slaps Jia in the face.